It was a cold Friday evening, and the city was covered with the faint glow of streetlights. Inside the tall glass building of one of the biggest companies in town, a grand celebration was about to begin. The CEO had just closed another successful year, and his team decided to host a formal dinner in the company's large event hall. Everything looked perfect. Tables were decorated with white flowers, silver candles flickered softly, and a grand piano stood proudly near the stage, polished until it shone like black glass. Guests began to arrive one after another, dressed in elegant suits and sparkling dresses. Waiters carried trays of drinks and soft classical music played in the background. Laughter echoed across the room as people greeted each other, sharing stories about business, travel, and success. Near the back of the hall, a woman in a simple uniform quietly moved between tables, making sure everything stayed clean and organized. She was the company cleaner, someone most of the guests never paid attention to. She had been working there for almost a year, always silent, always focused on her job. Nobody knew much about her. She came early, left late, and never tried to draw attention. While everyone else laughed and celebrated, she moved quietly, picking up empty glasses and wiping the floor when someone spilled a drink. Her eyes, however, kept glancing at the grand piano. Each time she passed it, her gaze softened for a moment. It was almost like she was looking at an old friend she hadn't seen in years. The CEO entered the hall with his usual confident smile. He was tall, commanding, and the kind of man whose presence filled a room instantly. Everyone clapped as he raised his glass to make a toast. He thanked his employees for their hard work, shared some light jokes, and ended his short speech with something that made the room buzz with laughter. He pointed toward the grand piano and said, "That piano has been sitting there for months and I've never heard anyone play it. My late wife used to play Chopin on it. If anyone here can play Chopin like she did, I'll marry them on the spot." The room burst into laughter. Some people clapped, some whistled jokingly, and others teased their friends to take up the challenge. It was clearly meant as a joke, a funny way to remember his wife while keeping the atmosphere light. But near the corner, the cleaner froze. Her hands, which had been holding a tray of empty glasses, trembled slightly. The moment she heard the name Chopin, something deep inside her stirred. The laughter around her faded into the background. She looked again at the piano, its shiny keys, its polished lid, the way the light reflected off it. She knew those notes. She knew that sound. Years ago, before life became what it was now, she had studied piano. Music had been her first love. Chopin had been her favorite composer. She used to spend hours practicing his pieces, feeling every note with her heart. But that was another life. Back then, she was a student at a small music academy. Her teacher used to tell her she had a gift, that her hands spoke emotions words could never describe. But dreams, no matter how beautiful, often get buried when life becomes hard. When her father lost his job, she had to quit school. The piano lessons stopped. The dream stopped, and her hands, once trained to play Chopin, started holding mops and cleaning cloths instead. Now, years later, she stood there in her simple uniform, listening to the laughter of people who would never imagine what she once was capable of. As the guests continued chatting, the CEO's challenge became the topic of the night. A few guests walked toward the piano, pretending to play, laughing as they tapped random keys. The sound was clumsy and harsh. Everyone laughed louder. The cleaner kept her distance but couldn't stop watching. Every wrong note made her flinch a little. It was almost painful to hear such careless sounds coming from such a beautiful instrument. One of the guests, a young manager who was trying to impress his boss, joked loudly, "Maybe we should hire a real pianist next time, sir. This poor piano must feel lonely." The CEO chuckled. "You're right," he said. "But unless one of you surprises me with some hidden talent, I guess it'll stay silent." The cleaner lowered her eyes. She didn't mean to care. She wasn't supposed to. It wasn't her place to stand out. But still, something kept her standing there, rooted to the spot, as if the piano itself was calling her name. As she walked past it to collect another empty tray, her reflection appeared on the shiny surface of the piano's lid. For a brief second, she saw herself not as the cleaner she had become, but as the young woman she once was, a dreamer, a pianist, a girl with music in her soul. She blinked, shook the thought away, and returned to her work. But her heart wouldn't quiet down. Each step she took, each voice she heard around her, it all faded behind the growing sound in her memory. She could almost hear the melody of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major playing in her mind. Her fingers twitched slightly, remembering how it felt to touch the keys. As the evening went on, the CEO mingled with his guests, shaking hands and laughing at stories. He didn't notice the cleaner's quiet glances. He didn't notice the way she paused near the piano, her eyes filled with memories. To him, she was invisible, just another part of the staff making sure the evening ran smoothly. But one of the older waiters, who had known her for a while, noticed her expression. When he passed by, he whispered softly, "You okay?" She smiled faintly. "Yes, just listening," she said. He nodded but looked puzzled. "You like piano?" Her smile deepened, though it was tinged with sadness. "I used to," she replied before moving away. As the night grew longer, the noise in the hall increased. People were laughing louder now, some dancing near the stage while others gathered around the bar. No one paid attention to the piano anymore. It stood there untouched, quiet, waiting. The cleaner found herself alone near it when she went to pick up some empty glasses. She hesitated for a moment, looking around to make sure no one was watching. Her hand hovered above the keys, trembling. She wanted to touch them. Just once. Her fingers brushed lightly against one of the keys, and a soft note echoed through the air. It was a gentle sound, pure and delicate, but it made her heart race. She quickly pulled her hand back, afraid someone might see. Just then the CEO walked by holding a glass of wine, talking with a guest. He glanced toward her and noticed her near the piano. He smirked slightly and said with a teasing tone, "You're not planning to take my challenge, are you?" The guest beside him laughed. "Maybe she will surprise you," he said jokingly. The cleaner froze, unsure what to say. "No, sir," she whispered, stepping aside. "I was just cleaning." The CEO smiled politely and walked away, clearly thinking nothing of it. But as he disappeared into the crowd, the cleaner stood still, her heart pounding. Something inside her felt alive again. For the rest of the evening, she couldn't stop thinking about that one note she had played. It was like a spark that had touched something buried deep inside her. She kept hearing Chopin's melody in her head, the rise and fall, the gentle sadness, the emotion in every note. She didn't sleep that night. When she went home to her small apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed, her hands resting on her lap, moving slightly as if she were still playing. The feeling was impossible to describe. It wasn't just music. It was a part of her soul she thought she had lost. And now, because of one careless joke, it had been awakened again. The next day, she arrived at work early, before anyone else. The hall was empty, the lights dim, and the grand piano stood alone, waiting. She walked toward it slowly, her heart beating fast. She ran her hand across the smooth lid, her reflection staring back at her. For a long moment, she just stood there in silence. Then, taking a deep breath, she sat down on the piano bench. She placed her fingers on the keys, and though she didn't press them yet, she could already feel the emotion rushing back. The weight of her memories, the beauty of music, the warmth of her past. Outside, the sun began to rise, casting a soft golden glow through the glass windows. Inside, she whispered to herself, "If only they knew." And as the first light of morning touched the piano, she knew something inside her had changed forever. That night's challenge wasn't over. It had only just begun. The cleaner sat in front of the piano as the early morning light filled the empty hall. The silence around her was deep, almost sacred. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. It had been years since she last touched a piano properly. She wasn't sure if her fingers still remembered what to do. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the first key. A soft note echoed in the large room. Then another. Slowly, she began to play a simple melody she still remembered from her early lessons. The sound was gentle, uncertain at first, but soon it started to flow naturally. Each note she played felt like a heartbeat returning to life. As her fingers moved across the keys, her body relaxed. The years of cleaning floors and carrying buckets had made her hands rough, but they still knew how to find beauty. Music was muscle memory hidden deep inside her, waiting for this moment. By the time she finished, her eyes were wet with tears. She wiped them quickly, afraid someone might walk in. She hadn't meant to play for long. It was supposed to be just one note, one touch. But once she started, she couldn't stop. The sound of footsteps startled her. She stood quickly and turned around. It was one of the security guards doing his early morning rounds. He looked surprised to see her sitting at the piano. "Hey," he said kindly. "I didn't know you could play." She smiled nervously. "I was just cleaning the dust off the keys." The guard chuckled. "Sounded more like you were cleaning my soul." "That was beautiful." She blushed and shook her head. "It's been too long. I used to play before." He nodded, not asking more. "Well, if you ever want to play again, I won't tell anyone," he said with a wink before walking away. His words stayed with her. Play again. The thought both scared and thrilled her. She hadn't allowed herself to dream like that for years, but the feeling of those keys under her fingers, it was like coming home. Later that day, the company buzzed with usual activity. Employees rushed through the halls, meetings filled the rooms, and the CEO was back in his office reviewing new projects. The cleaner went about her work quietly, but her heart was different now. Every time she walked past the piano, she felt it calling her name. She started staying a little later after her shift. When everyone had gone home, she would slip into the hall, sit at the piano, and play softly in the dark. Her music wasn't perfect, but it was full of emotion. The notes told her story of lost dreams, struggles, and a small hope being reborn. One night, while she was playing, she didn't realize that someone else was still in the building. The CEO had returned to his office after dinner to review some documents. He was walking toward the exit when he heard faint piano music coming from the hall. He stopped in his tracks. The melody was familiar, soft, emotional, full of heart. It was a Chopin piece, the same one his late wife used to play when they were alone at home. He followed the sound quietly, his chest tightening with emotion. When he reached the doorway, he saw her, the cleaner, sitting at the piano, her eyes closed, completely lost in the music. Her hands moved gracefully, not hurried, not forced, just flowing with natural feeling. He didn't move. He couldn't. The melody filled the air like a memory. When the final note faded, she sighed softly, as if releasing something she had carried for years. That's when she noticed him standing there. Her heart stopped. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly, standing up. "I shouldn't have." He raised his hand gently. "Don't apologize," he said in a calm voice. "That was incredible." She looked down, unsure what to say. "It's been a long time. I didn't mean to disturb anyone." The CEO walked closer, still looking at the piano. "You were playing Chopin," he said softly. "Do you know what piece that was?" She nodded slowly. "Nocturne in E-flat major." His throat tightened. "That was my wife's favorite piece." Silence filled the space between them. The cleaner lowered her gaze. "I didn't know, sir. I used to love that piece too." He stood there for a moment, lost in thought. "You played it beautifully. I haven't heard it like that since she passed." Her eyes softened with empathy. "Music has a way of bringing people back," she said quietly. He nodded, still watching her. For the first time, he saw her not as part of the cleaning staff, but as a person with a story, a woman who carried something powerful inside her. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then told him. He repeated it slowly, as if trying to memorize it. "You've been working here for a while, haven't you?" "Yes, sir. Almost a year," he nodded thoughtfully. "And no one knew you could play like that?" She smiled faintly. "It's not something people ask about." He gave a small chuckle. "I suppose not. Still, you shouldn't hide it." The cleaner shook her head. "It's just a part of my past, sir. I gave it up a long time ago." He looked at her curiously. "Why?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "Because life doesn't always give you time for dreams. Sometimes you just have to survive." Her words hit him harder than she realized. For a long moment, he didn't reply. Then finally he said, "You survived, yes, but that doesn't mean you have to stop living." She looked up at him, surprised. He smiled slightly, then added, "You have a gift. Don't let it gather dust." Before she could respond, he nodded politely and left the hall, leaving her standing beside the piano, her heart pounding with confusion and warmth. That night she couldn't sleep again. The CEO's words echoed in her mind. "You have a gift. Don't let it gather dust." For years she had believed that her life had no space for music anymore. Bills, rent, exhaustion, those were her priorities. But maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. Maybe there was still room for a little beauty, even in her simple life. The next few days she continued her routine. But something had changed between her and the CEO. Each morning, when she passed by his office, he would greet her with a nod, Sometimes he'd stop to ask small questions. How long she had studied music, what her favorite composers were, what pieces she liked to play. The other employees noticed the change too. They whispered among themselves, wondering why the CEO was suddenly talking to the cleaner. Some found it amusing. Others were curious. But he didn't seem to care. One afternoon, he invited her into the hall again. "Would you play something?" he asked kindly. She hesitated. "Now?" "People are still around," he smiled. "Let them listen. It's good for them." Reluctantly, she sat down at the piano. This time she chose something simpler, Chopin's Prelude in E minor. As soon as she began, the room fell silent. People passing by stopped at the door. The sound was soft yet powerful, every note full of feeling. When she finished, there was a pause before a small round of applause broke out. Some smiled, some whispered in awe. She turned red with embarrassment. The CEO clapped quietly, his expression filled with genuine admiration. After that day, everything in the company felt different. The grand piano, once just a decoration, had come to life again. Employees often found her playing softly during lunch breaks or after hours. The CEO sometimes joined, sitting nearby in silence, lost in thought. One evening, as she finished playing, he said quietly, "You know, when I made that joke about marrying whoever could play Chopin, I didn't expect it would bring someone like you to this piano." She laughed softly. "Neither did I," he smiled. "Maybe some jokes are fate's way of reminding us what we've lost." She didn't answer. She just smiled because deep down she knew he was right. For years she had felt invisible, like her dreams didn't matter anymore. But now, because of one silly challenge, the music in her heart was alive again. The piano wasn't just an instrument, it was her voice, her story, her proof that even quiet people can carry something extraordinary inside them. And though she didn't know what the future held, one thing was certain: she would never hide that part of herself again. The weeks passed quietly, but something in the company had changed. The cleaner was no longer invisible. People greeted her now when she entered the hall. Some even smiled at her or asked small questions about music. It felt strange at first, being noticed, but also comforting. For the first time in years, she felt seen. The CEO had become a different man too. The joking, confident tone he once carried was still there, but now there was warmth behind it. He started arriving earlier to the office, often walking past the piano and running his fingers over its keys, lost in thought. Sometimes he would stop by and ask her to play for a few minutes before meetings began. It became their quiet ritual. One morning he called her to his office. She felt nervous as she entered, holding the edges of her uniform tightly. He was sitting behind his desk, looking at a small framed photo of his late wife. When he noticed her, he smiled. "I was thinking," he began. "Next week we're hosting a charity dinner here in the hall. A lot of important guests will be attending. Business partners, investors, even some musicians." She nodded, unsure what he was getting at. He leaned forward slightly. "I want you to play something that night." Her eyes widened. "Me, in front of everyone?" He nodded. "Yes, you have a gift and I want others to hear it too." Her heart began to race. "Sir, I'm not a performer anymore. I haven't played in years and He interrupted gently. "You've been performing every night in this hall. The only difference is that now more people will be listening." She didn't know what to say. The thought of playing in front of the same people who once looked down on her filled her with fear. But deep inside, she also felt a small spark of excitement, the same feeling she used to get before concerts long ago. "I'll think about it," she said softly. He smiled. "That's all I ask." For the next few days, she couldn't focus on anything else. Every break she got, she found herself at the piano, playing quietly to test what pieces still lived in her memory. Her fingers were slower now, but the emotion was still there. When she closed her eyes, it felt like time disappeared. One evening, while she was playing, one of the young assistants from the office overheard her and recorded a short clip on his phone. He showed it to a few colleagues, and soon everyone in the building was talking about the cleaner who could play Chopin. Some didn't believe it until they heard it themselves. The night of the charity dinner arrived faster than she expected. The hall was glowing again, lights, flowers, and shining silverware on every table. Guests began to fill the room, their laughter mixing with the sound of glasses clinking. The CEO moved confidently through the crowd, shaking hands and welcoming people. She stood near the kitchen door, dressed neatly but simply. Her heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure she could go through with it. Her hands were shaking and she kept looking at the piano, her stomach twisting with nerves. The CEO noticed her and walked over. "Are you ready?" he asked kindly. She took a deep breath. "I don't know," she admitted. He smiled reassuringly. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Just play from your heart." She nodded, trying to calm herself. As dinner ended, the CEO stepped onto the small stage near the piano and spoke into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice confident but gentle, "thank you all for being here tonight. Before we end this evening, I want to share something special with you." The crowd quieted. He continued, "A few weeks ago, I made a joke in this very hall. I said I would marry anyone who could play Chopin as beautifully as my late wife once did." The audience chuckled lightly. "But what I didn't know was that the person capable of that was already among us, someone who works harder than anyone else, yet has the heart of a true artist." A soft murmur ran through the crowd as he turned to the cleaner and said warmly, "Would you please join us?" She froze. Every eye in the room turned toward her. For a moment she wished she could disappear, but then the CEO gave her a small nod, and something in his expression gave her courage. With slow, careful steps, she walked to the piano. The laughter had stopped. The whispers faded. People looked at her curiously, wondering what she was doing. She sat down, her hands trembling as they hovered above the keys. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major floated into the air. They were soft, delicate, and full of emotion. The sound carried through the hall like a quiet breeze. People stopped eating, stopped whispering, stopped moving. Every note seemed to touch something inside them. Her fingers moved with grace, finding each key naturally, like they were born for this. The music rose and fell like a heartbeat, gentle, sorrowful, yet filled with beauty. Her eyes stayed closed as she played, completely lost in the melody. The CEO stood near the piano, watching her with wide eyes. It was the same piece his wife had played on their wedding anniversary years ago. The same song that used to fill their home. The same song that had gone silent when she passed. Hearing it now was like reliving a memory he thought he had lost forever. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. As the piece reached its soft ending, the cleaner let the final note fade slowly, hanging in the air like a whisper. When it was over, the hall was completely silent. No one moved. No one clapped right away. The quiet was heavy, filled with emotion. Then slowly one person began to applaud. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room stood up. The applause grew louder, echoing off the walls. The cleaner sat still, overwhelmed. She had never heard clapping like that in her life, not even when she was a student. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She didn't even realize she was crying until she saw the CEO standing beside her, his eyes full of pride and gratitude. He spoke softly, so only she could hear. "You didn't just play music tonight, you brought my wife back to life, even if only for a few minutes." She looked up at him, speechless. He turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "this woman reminded me tonight that true talent doesn't care about titles or jobs. It lives in the heart. And sometimes, the most extraordinary people are the ones we overlook every day." The crowd erupted in applause again. Some guests wiped their eyes. Others came forward to shake her hand, to thank her for the performance. For the first time in years, she smiled freely, an open, genuine smile filled with relief and joy. She had faced her fear, and in doing so, she had found herself again. When the hall finally quieted down, the CEO looked at her and said with a playful grin, "So, should I keep my promise about that marriage proposal?" The crowd laughed warmly. She blushed and shook her head with a small laugh of her own. "I think you've already given me something far more valuable than that," she said softly. He tilted his head curiously. "And what's that?" She smiled. "A reason to believe in myself again." That answer made him smile too. As the guests began to leave, many stopped to compliment her. Some invited her to play at their events. Others simply thanked her for the emotional moment she had created. But she didn't think about fame or opportunity. All she felt was peace. Later that night, when the hall was empty and quiet again, she sat alone at the piano once more. The candles had burned low and the air was calm. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, smiling softly to herself. The grand piano, once just a piece of decoration, had become her voice again. And though she still wore the same uniform, she didn't feel like the cleaner anymore. She felt like herself, like the girl who once dreamed, who once believed, and who now had found her way back through music. Outside, the city lights shimmered, and inside, the echo of Chopin lingered, a reminder that beauty can rise even from the quietest corners of life. The morning after the charity dinner, the cleaner woke up with her heart still racing. The memory of the applause, the eyes staring in awe, and the gentle words of the CEO kept repeating in her mind. It was a strange feeling, something she had not felt in years. Her life had always been about survival, about doing her work quietly and avoiding attention. But last night had changed everything. She arrived at the office earlier than usual. The hall was empty, silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. She walked past the tables, past the flowers still fresh from the night before, and approached the grand piano. Her fingers traced the keys lightly, remembering the feeling of performing, the rush of emotions, and the quiet satisfaction that followed. As she was lost in thought, the CEO entered the hall. He walked slowly, almost reverently, toward the piano. He did not speak at first, just stood there, his eyes on the polished black surface. She turned and noticed him, feeling a flutter of nerves. "You're here early," he said softly. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "I kept thinking about last night." He nodded. "So did I. I kept hearing the music in my mind long after everyone left." She smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. The silence between them felt heavy but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that allowed two people to share a moment without needing words. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter now. "I have to be honest with you. When I heard you play Chopin, I wasn't just impressed. I was moved, more than I expected to be." Her hands rested on the piano keys. "I didn't know it would affect you like that," she said softly. He shook his head. "It wasn't just the music. It was the emotion behind it. I could feel the years you had carried, the moments you had lost, and yet here you were, bringing it all back to life." She looked down, unsure what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Most people only saw her uniform, her hands carrying cleaning tools, her face quiet and unnoticed. But now the CEO was seeing her. Not the job she did, but the person she was, the person she could be. After a moment, she finally asked, "Do you think people will ever believe me? That I've been hiding this all these years?" He smiled gently. "You don't need them to believe you. You need to believe it yourself. And from what I saw last night, you do. You just need to remember it every day." She took a deep breath and nodded, letting the words sink in. Over the next few days, something remarkable began to happen. The CEO started inviting her to play during small office gatherings, private moments when employees were in the hall for meetings or breaks. At first she hesitated, but each time she allowed herself to play. The more she played, the more confident she became. Each note told a story of her life, of struggles, of sacrifice, of hidden dreams that never died. One afternoon, the CEO asked her to play a piece she had not attempted in years. It was a complex composition, full of rapid scales and delicate transitions. Her fingers trembled as she placed them on the keys, unsure if she could still manage it. "Don't think about the notes," he said softly. "Play what you feel." She closed her eyes, let her memory guide her hands, and began. The music filled the hall. It was not perfect, there were tiny slips, but it was full of feeling, of honesty, of life. When she finished, the CEO remained silent for a moment, then smiled. "You've come so far," he said, "more than anyone could imagine. And yet I know this is only the beginning." His words struck her deeply. For years, she had felt trapped by circumstance. She had believed that her dreams were over, that her talent was gone forever. But here was someone, a powerful, busy man, whose life seemed untouchable, telling her that what she had was special, that it mattered, and that it deserved to be seen and heard. That evening, she walked home slowly, her mind buzzing with thoughts. The city outside was alive with lights and movement, but she felt a quiet calm within herself. She had played in front of strangers, in front of people who had never noticed her before, and she had not failed. Instead, she had opened a door she thought was closed forever. Days turned into weeks. The cleaner continued to play when she could, letting the music pour out of her. The CEO often joined her, sitting nearby in silence, sometimes listening, sometimes speaking softly about his memories of his late wife. Their bond grew quietly, built on shared appreciation for music, understanding, and trust. One morning he asked her to come into his office. She felt nervous as she stepped inside. He smiled warmly and gestured for her to sit. "I've been thinking," he said, "about last night and the week since. Your talent, it's extraordinary, and it's time others see it too." She looked at him, uncertain. "Are you saying I should perform for a larger audience?" He nodded. "Yes, but not just here. Outside the company. People should hear your music not because it's a spectacle, but because it's real. Because it carries a story only you can tell." Her heart pounded. The thought of playing for strangers beyond the walls of the building terrified her. She had hidden her talent for so long that the idea of exposing it felt impossible. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "You already did," he said softly. "You played for hundreds of people last week. You survived that. You can survive anything after that. And more importantly, people will hear your heart through your hands." She took a deep breath, considering his words. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where music was not hidden, one where she could share her gift without fear, one where she could be proud of what she was capable of. Over the next few days, the CEO arranged for a small event at the company, inviting a few musicians and music enthusiasts. The cleaner practiced every evening after her shift, playing quietly in the hall. Each day her confidence grew. The more she played, the more she remembered the joy music had once brought her. When the day of the event arrived, she felt a familiar nervousness in her chest. She approached the piano, her hands slightly trembling. But she also felt a strange calm, a quiet understanding that this was where she belonged. The audience began to gather. There were musicians, executives, and some employees who had been present the night of the charity dinner. Whispers passed through the crowd. "That's her, the cleaner who plays Chopin," and eyes turned toward her. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. When she began to play, the hall fell silent. The notes floated gently, soft at first, then rising with emotion. Every person listening felt the music in a different way, but all felt something powerful, a connection, a truth, an honesty that came only from someone who had lived through hardship, yet still held beauty inside. The CEO watched from the side, quietly proud. Each note reminded him of the first time he had heard her play, of the moment she had brought his wife's memory back to life. Now he saw something more. He saw a person who had endured, who had persisted, and who had found herself again through music. When she finished, the applause was long and heartfelt. Tears ran down the faces of some audience members. Others whispered words of praise, awe, and admiration. The cleaner sat quietly, her hands resting on the keys, overwhelmed but fulfilled. Afterward, the CEO approached her again. "Do you see?" he said softly. "This is who you are. Not just the cleaner, not just the quiet person everyone overlooks. You are a musician, a storyteller, a woman with something extraordinary to share." She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she truly believed him. She had been hiding for years, but now she could no longer deny herself or her talent. She had faced fear, played in front of strangers, and touched their hearts. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me." He shook his head gently. "No, you believed in yourself. I just helped you remember." From that day forward, everything changed. She continued to play, not just for the company, but for anyone who would listen. Music became her life again, a reminder that even the quietest souls can hold extraordinary gifts. And the CEO, once a man defined by success and business, discovered something else too: the quiet power of talent, resilience, and the beauty of seeing someone's true self for the first time. Together, in that quiet hall surrounded by the echoes of piano notes, two lives had been transformed. One had been given a voice again. The other had been reminded of the magic that exists in unexpected places, waiting patiently for someone to notice. The weeks following the small company performance passed with a quiet magic. The cleaner had become a different person in her own eyes, though outwardly her uniform remained the same. She continued her daily tasks, cleaning floors, arranging chairs, and organizing the hall. But now each chore was accompanied by a sense of purpose. She knew that the piano waited for her, that her music mattered, and that she could once again share her gift with the world. The CEO continued to watch her quietly, always with admiration and respect. To him, she was no longer just an employee. She was a reminder of everything that talent, courage, and persistence could achieve, even in the most unlikely of people. The office staff had started to notice the change as well. People who once ignored her began to greet her with respect. A few even asked her to play for small office celebrations or birthday gatherings. And each time she found herself smiling a little more, feeling the music return to her life in a way she never thought possible. One afternoon, the CEO called her into his office again. She felt a flicker of nervousness, though it was different this time. It was a mix of excitement and anticipation rather than fear. "I have been thinking," he said gently, "about the performance you gave a few weeks ago. People were deeply moved, and not just here. Some musicians and guests who attended have asked if you would consider playing at other events. They want to hear more of your music." She looked at him unsure. I don't know, sir. I've never done anything like that before," he smiled. "I know, but you don't need to think of it as performing. Think of it as sharing your story through music. Nothing more, nothing less. You've already proven that your music touches hearts. That's all that matters." Her mind raced. The idea of stepping beyond the familiar walls of the office, beyond the comfort of the empty hall she had practiced in, was intimidating. But there was also a thrill she hadn't felt in years. The possibility of living a life where her music could truly matter to others. "I'll try," she said softly. The CEO's eyes lit up with encouragement. "That's all I ask. Just try." In the days that followed, she practiced with a renewed determination. She played for hours in the quiet hall after her cleaning duties were done. Sometimes she imagined the audience in her mind, but most often she played for herself, feeling the music fill the spaces that had been empty in her heart for so long. Each note carried the weight of her past struggles, the sacrifice of lost years, and the quiet hope she had nurtured through the hardest times. When the night of her first public performance outside the company arrived, she was nervous. She wore a simple dress that felt unfamiliar but right for the occasion. The hall was filled with guests, many of whom had heard her play only through word of mouth or brief recordings. Some were musicians, others were business people, but all were curious. The CEO gave her a reassuring nod as she approached the piano. "Just play from your heart," he said softly. She sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and closed her eyes. The lights dimmed slightly, the audience quieted, and for a moment there was only the piano and her memory of the music. She began with a soft, slow melody. Her hands moved with care and precision, though there was an unmistakable warmth in every note. As the music flowed, the hall seemed to hold its breath. People leaned forward, captivated not by her fame or status, but by the honesty of her performance. Every note carried emotion, pain, hope, joy, and a quiet strength that could not be ignored. The more she played, the more she lost herself in the music. The years of doubt, fear, and invisibility melted away. She was no longer just the cleaner, or the girl who had set aside her dreams. She was a musician, a storyteller, and her heart was speaking through her hands. When the final note faded, the hall remained silent for a long moment. Then slowly applause began. One person clapped, then another, until the entire room erupted in cheers and applause. Some guests wiped tears from their eyes. Others smiled broadly, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling in the music. The CEO stood near the front, his expression a mix of pride and admiration. He stepped forward when the applause began to die down. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice filled with genuine emotion, "this woman reminded us tonight that true talent can be hidden in the most unlikely places. She reminded us that courage, resilience, and dedication can bring beauty to the world, even after years of struggle." The cleaner rose from the piano bench, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't know what to say. Words felt small compared to the journey she had been through. Instead, she simply bowed her head and smiled, feeling the warmth and acknowledgement that had eluded her for so long. After the performance, guests approached her one by one, offering congratulations and kind words. Musicians asked about her background, curious about how she had learned and developed such skill. Business people complimented her on the courage it took to play in front of strangers. And through it all, she felt a quiet joy. Joy not from attention, but from being recognized for who she truly was. Later, the CEO approached her privately. "You've done more than play music tonight," he said softly. "You've inspired people. You've shown them that talent and dedication can exist anywhere, that the quietest people often have the most to give. And more than that, you've reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. She looked at him, her heart full. Thank you, sir. For everything. For believing in me when no one else did. He shook his head gently. No, you believed in yourself. I just helped you remember what you already knew. In the days that followed, invitations to perform at other events began to arrive. She accepted only a few at first, choosing carefully and focusing on the ones that felt meaningful. Each time she played, her confidence grew and her joy deepened. Music was no longer just a memory or a secret passion. It had become her voice, her purpose, and her way of connecting with the world. Even within the company, things changed. Employees treated her with newfound respect. The cleaning supplies she carried no longer defined her. Her talent did. And though she remained humble, she carried herself differently, proud, confident, and aware of the gift she had been given. One evening, the CEO invited her to play in a private gathering for close friends and associates. It was a smaller crowd than the charity event, but the intimacy made it even more special. She arrived, sat at the piano, and began to play. The music was different this time, softer, slower, more reflective. Each note carried a personal story, the struggles she had endured, the years she had given to survival instead of dreams, and the quiet hope that had never left her. As she played, she noticed the CEO watching her closely. His expression was gentle, filled with gratitude and understanding. It was as if he could feel the life behind every note, the story behind every pause. And in that moment she realized something profound. The music wasn't just for the audience. It was for both of them, a bridge connecting two lives through memory, emotion, and shared humanity. When the final note faded, the room remained silent for a moment, caught in the weight of what had been shared. Then applause began, slow at first, then growing until the hall echoed with appreciation. The cleaner stood quietly, tears in her eyes, overwhelmed not by recognition, but by the realization that her music mattered. The CEO stepped forward and whispered, "You've done more than I ever imagined. You've healed hearts, mine included." She smiled softly, feeling the truth in his words. "I never thought I could do this again," she admitted. "You didn't need to think," he said gently. "You just needed to play." From that night on, her life changed completely. She continued her work as a cleaner, but it was no longer the defining part of her identity. She was a musician, a storyteller, and a woman who had reclaimed her dreams. Invitations to perform continued to arrive, but more importantly, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known. Her music became a source of joy not only for her, but for everyone who heard it. The CEO, too, was changed. He had learned something profound about talent, humility, and the quiet strength of those who are often overlooked. The cleaner had reminded him that true beauty and inspiration often come from unexpected places. And together they had created something rare, a connection born from music, respect, and shared humanity. In the end, it was not about applause, recognition, or even the challenge that had begun it all. It was about finding courage, reclaiming lost dreams, and remembering that even the quietest souls have extraordinary gifts waiting to be discovered. The grand piano stood in the hall, no longer just a decoration. It was alive with the sound of her music, echoing the story of a woman who had been underestimated, overlooked, and silenced, yet had risen to touch the hearts of everyone around her. And the cleaner, once invisible, once doubted, had become a symbol of resilience, hope, and the undeniable power of following one's heart. Her journey had begun with a joke, a casual remark by a CEO, and a moment of courage, but it ended with something far greater, a life reclaimed, a voice restored, and the knowledge that the most extraordinary people often shine brightest when least expected. And through it all, the music continued, soft, powerful, and full of life, a testament to the beauty that can emerge from even the quietest corners of the world.